In the shadows of the Great Depression, when desperation and greed walked hand in hand, there lived a woman whose beauty masked something far darker than anyone could imagine. She smiled sweetly, cared tenderly for the elderly men she called her friends, and promised them comfort in their final years. But behind those soft words and kind eyes lurked a predator who saw their gold, not their souls. Tonight, we step into the chilling world of Anna Marie Hahn, the charming widow who turned affection into poison and compassion into a death sentence. It began in the aftermath of the Great Depression, when the streets of America were heavy with despair and hunger. In those desperate years, people clung to kindness wherever they could find it, and loneliness was as deadly as poverty itself. Among the German immigrant community in Cincinnati, Ohio, a young woman named Anna Marie Hahn seemed to offer both comfort and companionship. She was blonde, polite, and soft-spoken, carrying herself with the quiet assurance of someone who appeared trustworthy. But behind her gentle smile and calm eyes was a hunger of a different kind, one that could not be satisfied by bread or warmth. She desired wealth, attention, and control, and she would find her way to them through the lives of those who were too lonely to see the danger sitting across from them. Anna's story began long before her first crime. Born in Bavaria, she came from a modest family, and even as a young girl, she was restless and ambitious. She had beauty that drew attention and charm that disarmed suspicion. When she arrived in America, she carried with her tales of loss and hardship, the perfect cloak for manipulation. She married a man named Philip Hahn, but the marriage quickly turned cold. Money was scarce, and Anna's taste for luxury began to grow stronger. She wanted fine clothes, gold jewelry, and nights out where she could feel powerful among men who mistook her laughter for affection. The life of a housewife bored her, and soon she realized that her looks could open doors that honesty could not. Cincinnati's German community was tightly knit, filled with elderly men who had no families left, men who trusted anyone who spoke their language and smiled kindly. Anna began to visit these men under the pretense of being a caregiver, offering to help them with errands, medicine, or companionship. She carried food, baked goods, and warm gestures of affection, and soon the rumors of her generosity spread. They said she was an angel, a blessing for the old and forgotten. She listened to their stories, their regrets, their fears of dying alone. But while they saw in her the kindness of a daughter, Anna saw in them something else entirely. Their savings, their life insurance, their homes. Her first victim was said to be an old man named Ernest Kohler. She visited him often, bringing him homemade meals and tending to his needs. When he fell ill and died suddenly, no one suspected her. Death among the elderly was common, and Anna even appeared at the funeral, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Soon after, she was seen wearing new dresses, gambling at racetracks, and visiting hotels that charged more for a single night than most people could earn in a week. Her husband asked where the money came from, and she simply smiled, saying she had been repaid for her kindness. It became clear that Anna's sense of morality had dissolved completely. Her victims were no longer people, but opportunities waiting to be claimed. She grew bolder with each death, confident that her intelligence and appearance made her untouchable. She studied poisons with the same curiosity others reserved for religion or art. Arsenic and digitalis became her silent weapons, mixed into food and drink, without leaving a trace. Her hands were steady, her tone calm, her timing perfect. Each man she cared for began to suffer the same slow decline: fatigue, nausea, dizziness, confusion. The symptoms were easily mistaken for age, and Anna was always there to comfort them as they slipped away, whispering soft words while death crept closer. She would collect their money, withdraw their savings, and vanish to the gambling houses before anyone could connect the dots. By 1932, she had created a pattern so precise that it almost looked like fate. Each new victim believed he was special to her, that she cared for him more than the others. But for Anna, love was simply another tool, as dangerous and useful as the poison she carried. She had learned to manipulate affection with surgical precision. Her voice could turn from gentle to desperate in a heartbeat, her tears could flow on command, and her laughter could drown suspicion before it had a chance to grow. She charmed her way into wills and bank accounts, convincing her victims to trust her completely. In a world shattered by economic ruin, her victims saw in her a rare light of compassion, not realizing that the light they followed would lead them to their graves. Her nights were spent in smoky gambling parlors, where she sat surrounded by men who had no idea the money she wagered was soaked in blood. She played cards with an intensity that mirrored her appetite for risk, laughing loudly as the coins clattered and the dealers watched in awe. The thrill of danger became her new addiction, stronger even than greed. Every time she rolled the dice or flipped a card, she felt alive, invincible. The lives she ended became just numbers in her mind, forgotten as easily as lost bets. To her, death was not horror, but strategy, a means of maintaining the illusion of control over a world that once made her feel powerless. Still, there were whispers. The doctors who examined her victims noticed strange symptoms. The neighbors wondered how so many of Anna's companions died so suddenly after she began visiting them. Yet no one dared to accuse her outright. The idea that a woman, especially one as delicate and polite as Anna, could commit such acts seemed absurd. Society still viewed women as nurturing, incapable of true malice. Anna understood this and used it to her advantage, masking her cruelty behind the armor of femininity. Each polite smile became a shield, each tear a disguise, until her entire existence was a performance she had perfected through repetition and deceit. As the months passed, her confidence grew dangerous. She began taking larger sums, writing herself checks, forging signatures, and flaunting her new wealth. Her husband, though suspicious, was too afraid to confront her. Friends began to drift away, uneasy with her sudden prosperity and secretive behavior. Yet Anna remained untouchable, believing she could outsmart everyone. What she didn't realize was that every crime, no matter how carefully hidden, leaves a trace. The poison she thought invisible was slowly weaving a web around her, one that would soon tighten and reveal the face of the so-called angel who walked among the lonely and turned their trust into her greatest weapon. The illusion of care became Anna's most lethal tool, and with every passing year, her methods grew more precise, more confident, more chilling in their calculation. She no longer needed to seek out victims because her reputation as a devoted caretaker had spread through the German-speaking neighborhoods of Cincinnati. Old men spoke fondly of her, believing her presence was a blessing, a comfort sent by fate to ease the final stretch of their lives. They would introduce her to friends, neighbors, and acquaintances, not realizing they were signing the death warrants of those they wished well. Each introduction was another opportunity, another life soon to wither under her watch. Her beauty disarmed them. Her charm melted their suspicion, and her soft voice carried the promise of affection that so many lonely souls longed for. In a time when companionship was rare and kindness even rarer, Anna became the embodiment of both. Her second known victim, a retired tailor named Albert Parker, was the kind of man everyone described as harmless, gentle, and generous. He was lonely, widowed, and often seen feeding birds outside his small apartment. When Anna offered to visit him, bring him meals, and take care of his home, he was overwhelmed with gratitude. She smiled as he thanked her, her mind already measuring the worth of his possessions, estimating the savings hidden away in his modest bank account. Within weeks, she was a daily presence in his life, cooking for him, managing his medicines, and reading him stories. To the outside world, she appeared devoted, an image she carefully maintained with every kind gesture and warm word. But behind the closed doors of his home, she began to administer her poison slowly, just enough to cause discomfort, but not suspicion. Albert's health began to falter, and when the doctor came, Anna stood by his bedside with tears in her eyes, nodding solemnly as the physician said it was likely just age and stress. Days later, Albert was dead, and Anna once again found herself with access to a dead man's savings and possessions. By this time, she had become skilled in her use of arsenic. She knew how to disguise the metallic taste, mixing it into beer, soup, or even desserts. She learned to time her doses so that the symptoms would mimic natural illness, causing confusion among doctors and sympathy among neighbors. The poison allowed her to maintain the appearance of devotion, comforting her victims as they grew weaker. She would sit beside their beds, holding their hands, whispering gentle words while death worked silently within them. It was a performance she perfected, an act of affection that masked a monstrous intent, and each time a man died, she grew more confident, her fear replaced with a perverse sense of power. She believed she had mastered life and death, that she alone could decide who lived and who perished. Money flowed into her hands as easily as trust. She sold belongings, forged signatures, withdrew funds, and gambled away every stolen dollar. Her addiction to gambling was no longer just a habit. It was the fuel that drove her crimes. She found thrill in the spinning roulette wheel, the shuffle of cards, the sound of coins sliding across the table. It was in those smoky halls that she felt alive, surrounded by men who mistook her for a glamorous widow with mysterious luck. They didn't know that her luck was bought with poison and deceit. Every game she played was paid for by a heartbeat that had stopped too soon. Every laugh she gave echoed the silence left behind by the men she'd murdered. The danger thrilled her, the secrecy excited her, and the thought of being caught no longer frightened her, it exhilarated her. As her greed deepened, so did her recklessness. She no longer waited for her victims to approach her. She sought them out, targeting those who seemed the weakest and the wealthiest. She became a hunter disguised as a savior, a woman who could weep on command and lie with ease. Her manipulation was layered, her deceit flawless. She would promise companionship, hint at affection, even speak of love if it made her victims more compliant. For men who had lost everything to time, her words were intoxicating. They believed her sincerity, felt warmth for the first time in years, and in their gratitude, they offered her access to everything they owned. Some even signed over property, eager to reward her for her kindness. They died believing she loved them, and she left their funerals with her head held high, wearing black dresses and crocodile tears. Her home became a quiet chamber of secrets. Neighbors often heard laughter, followed by silence, then the faint sound of coughing. She would tell them her patients were sick, that she was doing all she could to help them. No one questioned her sincerity because she played her role perfectly. She was known as the gentle nurse, the devoted widow, the angel of compassion. Yet behind her bedroom door were bottles of chemicals, powders, and substances she guarded like treasure. She read medical manuals and apothecary guides late at night, studying how different poisons affected the body. She learned how to blend doses so that no single death appeared unnatural. Her attention to detail was frightening in its precision, her understanding of death disturbingly methodical. It was not madness that drove her, but obsession, a cold, calculated pursuit of control. As the years passed, her list of victims grew longer. Names like George Obendorfer and Jacob Wagner would later appear in police files, each one linked by the same eerie pattern of trust, illness, and sudden death. But at the time, they were just faces in her web, men too kind or too desperate to see through her deception. She took advantage of their loneliness, feeding on it like a parasite. They believed her smiles meant safety, not knowing that every act of care was a step closer to their graves. She thrived in their isolation, knowing that no one would question her until it was too late. Each death strengthened her confidence and silenced her guilt until she could watch a man die without the slightest flicker of remorse. The money she stole never lasted long. She would gamble it away within days, chasing the thrill of chance with the same intensity she used to plan her murders. When she won, she celebrated wildly, buying new clothes and jewelry. When she lost, she sought out another victim. Her world had become a cycle of death and indulgence, deceit and escape, but with each new crime the shadows around her thickened and the whispers grew louder. Some began to wonder why her companions never survived her care, why the widow always seemed to prosper from the misfortune of those she claimed to love. Still, she smiled through it all, her mask unbroken, convinced that charm and beauty would always shield her from suspicion, never realizing that the walls she built with lies were beginning to close in around her. Her obsession with gambling had become the pulse of her existence, an addiction that devoured every trace of morality left in her soul. The money she stole through charm and death no longer satisfied her unless it was risked on the turn of a card or the spin of a wheel. The smoke-filled parlors and crowded racetracks became her new kingdom, places where luck replaced conscience and chance ruled everything. She would walk into those rooms with elegance, dressed in silks and pearls bought with the savings of the dead, carrying herself like a woman of means and mystery. The men she met there saw only her beauty and the glint in her eyes. They could never imagine that her diamonds had been purchased with the pain of those who had once trusted her. The thrill of winning filled her with a rush she could not find anywhere else, and losing only deepened her hunger to find more victims. Every bet she placed carried a shadow, every win a ghost. It was as if she was gambling not only with money, but with the very lives she stole to earn it. Her mind had begun to shift into something darker, a place where guilt no longer had meaning. She started viewing people as numbers, as opportunities waiting to be turned into cash for her next wager. When she met new potential victims, she no longer felt hesitation. Instead, she evaluated them like a merchant assessing goods. How much was he worth? How long would he last? How easily could he be deceived? Her charm had become mechanical, her words rehearsed. She would smile, listen, and weave stories of sympathy about her own supposed hardships, creating a bond built entirely on lies. Each man felt special, chosen, important to her, not realizing he was merely another entry in her growing catalogue of victims. She began to enjoy the manipulation itself as much as the money it brought, the power of watching someone trust her completely while she planned his slow, silent end. Her home life, meanwhile, grew more fractured. Her husband, Philip, had long since become a background figure in her world, a man silenced by confusion and fear. He knew something was wrong but couldn't prove it. He saw her new jewelry, her expensive clothes, her nights out that stretched till morning. She would brush off his questions with a gentle laugh, saying she had been paid for her services or that a grateful patient had rewarded her. When he tried to argue, she would turn cold and distant, her eyes hardening like stone. He began to avoid her, retreating into silence as she drifted further into her secret life. Their home became little more than a resting place between her acts of deceit and indulgence. To her neighbors, she was still the caring widow who helped the sick, but inside those walls she was restless, calculating, and filled with a growing arrogance that blinded her to danger. It was around this time that the police first began to notice a strange pattern. Several elderly men from the same community had died under peculiar circumstances, all of them having known or been cared for by Anna. The deaths were dismissed at first, attributed to age or illness, but the coincidences began to pile up. A banker mentioned that Anna had withdrawn large sums from one of the deceased men's accounts shortly before his death. Another neighbor remembered seeing her leaving a home late at night, the same night the occupant had mysteriously fallen ill. Yet Anna was always prepared. She had an answer for every question, a story for every doubt. Her composure under scrutiny was remarkable. She could cry on command, act insulted, even threaten to leave town if the gossip didn't stop. Each performance reinforced her innocence, and each escape from suspicion made her more confident that she was untouchable. Her next target was Jacob Wagner, a retired shoemaker and one of her wealthiest victims. He was well-respected, cautious, and not easily fooled, but Anna's persistence wore him down. She began visiting him frequently, offering to cook and clean, often bringing him food laced with small doses of poison to weaken his body over time. As he grew sicker, she increased her presence, presenting herself as his sole caretaker. The neighborhood saw her devotion and praised her selflessness. When Jacob finally died, Anna wasted no time collecting what she believed was hers. To her surprise, Jacob's will included her name, granting her a significant inheritance. She took it as proof that fate itself favored her, that her actions were justified, that perhaps she was destined to live this way. She convinced herself that these men would have died soon anyway, that she was merely hastening the inevitable while ensuring her own comfort in a harsh world. But the death of Jacob Wagner did not fade quietly. The lawyer handling his estate found inconsistencies in the signatures and accounts. When another of her former patients died soon after under similar conditions, the whispers of coincidence began turning into suspicions of murder. The police reopened several cases, ordering exhumations and chemical analyses. For the first time, the walls around Anna began to tremble. But even then, she showed no fear. When questioned, she spoke calmly, smiled politely, and played the role of the misunderstood woman accused by a cruel world. Her poise unsettled investigators, yet the evidence was beginning to speak louder than her charm. Traces of arsenic were found in one of the exhumed bodies, a discovery that could no longer be explained away as natural death. The pattern of illness, inheritance, and sudden decline was too perfect to ignore. Still, Anna continued her routine as if nothing had changed. She attended parties, gambled, and smiled at neighbors who whispered behind her back. The thrill of danger now blended with her addiction to risk. She began to feel excitement in the possibility of being caught, as if her crimes were part of a game she believed she could always win. She underestimated the growing attention around her, believing that her intelligence and appearance would forever protect her. The men at the gambling table still adored her, and she fed off their admiration, laughing as she played with the fortunes of the dead. But somewhere beneath that laughter was the faint sound of cracks forming in her empire of deceit, cracks that would soon widen and reveal the truth she had buried beneath layers of lies, perfume, and poison. The walls of her deceit began to close in slowly, not with a sudden explosion, but through the quiet persistence of suspicion that refused to fade. The whispers around the German community of Cincinnati grew louder, traveling from home to home, from barbershops to church pews. People began to question why so many of Anna's companions had died in her care, and why she always seemed to benefit afterward. She felt the tension in the air but brushed it aside, convincing herself that her beauty and composure would continue to shield her. Yet the smallest cracks in her facade had already begun to form. When she looked in the mirror, she saw not the same confident widow she once was, but a reflection shadowed by exhaustion, a woman who could no longer remember which lie she had told to whom. Her nights were haunted by strange dreams, faces of men she had poisoned staring back at her, calling her name, their mouths filled with silence. But even fear could not break her greed. Every time anxiety threatened to surface, she silenced it with another trip to the racetrack, another hand of cards, another desperate attempt to convince herself she was still in control. The police investigation into the string of mysterious deaths became more focused after the passing of George Obendorfer, one of Anna's last and most trusting victims. He had traveled with her to Colorado, where she claimed the fresh air would help his failing health. Instead, he grew rapidly sicker under her care and died far from home, leaving Anna alone with his belongings. When she returned to Cincinnati with his trunk of possessions but without his body, neighbors grew uneasy. The police began asking questions, and her answers, though smooth, carried the weight of fabrication. It was discovered that she had attempted to collect money on his behalf, forging his name and lying about his last days. The inconsistencies caught the attention of the authorities, and for the first time she was no longer just the subject of gossip. She was a suspect. Her arrest was quiet but devastating. The newspapers erupted with headlines that painted her as both monster and temptress, the blonde widow who used charm as her weapon. Reporters called her the modern-day Borgia, drawing comparisons to the infamous Italian poisoners of old. In the holding cell, stripped of her fine clothes and jewelry, she appeared smaller, less certain, yet her arrogance remained. She denied everything, insisting she was a victim of envy, that people resented her success and misunderstood her kindness. When detectives presented her with evidence, letters, bank records, and witnesses, she responded with a smile, as if the entire investigation was a trivial misunderstanding. But when the exhumations began, that smile faltered. The bodies of her victims revealed traces of arsenic and other toxins, their deaths no longer mysteries but clear acts of deliberate murder. Science had spoken in a way charm could not silence. The courtroom became her stage, a place where she once again tried to perform her role as the misunderstood widow. Crowds gathered daily to witness the trial that had gripped the nation. Men and women filled the benches, curious to see the woman who had turned trust into death. Anna dressed elegantly, choosing soft colors and modest styles to evoke innocence. She smiled at the jury, nodded respectfully to the judge, and wept at carefully chosen moments. Her lawyers portrayed her as a devoted caretaker, a woman wronged by rumor and misinterpretation. But the prosecution had something stronger than sentiment. They had evidence. They presented the bottles of poison found in her home, the forged checks, the letters written to banks, and the testimonies of doctors who had noticed the unnatural symptoms of her victims. One by one, her lies unraveled, each thread revealing another layer of deceit. Witnesses who had once admired her now described her manipulations in painful detail, the way she had charmed the old, taken their trust, and watched them die. The public's fascination with her turned into horror as the scale of her crimes became clear. Newspapers described her as a smiling death, a woman who poisoned not for passion but for profit. The image of a woman calmly mixing arsenic into her victims' meals while speaking kindly to them unsettled the entire nation. In an era when women were expected to be nurturing and gentle, Anna's actions defied every stereotype, forcing people to confront the reality that evil could wear the face of beauty and gentleness. Reporters noted how she sat in court with perfect posture, showing no visible remorse. Some believed she still thought she could talk her way out of it, that she saw even the trial as another game to win. Others saw her as a symbol of corruption and greed, a reflection of the desperation that had spread through society after the Great Depression. As the evidence piled higher, Anna's composure began to crack. The endless testimonies, the photographs, the chemical analyses, all pointed to her guilt. She could no longer manipulate or charm her way through it. When the jury retired to deliberate, she sat quietly, her hands trembling for the first time in years. The silence that filled the courtroom as the verdict was read felt like the final curtain of her long, deadly performance. Guilty on all counts. The sentence: death by electric chair. For a brief moment, she appeared stunned, as though she had not truly believed it would come to this. But even as she was led away, she straightened her back, forcing a faint smile for the cameras. Pride was the last thing she refused to surrender. In prison, she maintained the same mask she had worn her entire life. She spoke politely to guards, read her Bible, and claimed her innocence until the end. Priests visited her, urging her to confess, but she avoided the subject, saying only that she had been misunderstood. The newspapers followed every moment of her final days, fascinated by her calmness. On the morning of her execution in November 1938, she walked into the death chamber without protest, her face pale but composed. She wore a simple dress, her hair neatly pinned, and spoke softly to the chaplain. Witnesses later said she looked almost peaceful, as if she believed she was about to win one last game. The chair hummed with electricity, and the air in the room grew heavy with the weight of her silence. Outside, the crowd waited in uneasy anticipation, watching the smoke from the prison roof fade into the night sky, carrying with it the last breath of the woman who had turned kindness into a weapon and trust into her path to destruction. After her death, the story of Anna Marie Hahn did not fade away. It spread like a lingering curse whispered across generations. The newspapers continued to print her name long after the execution, dissecting her life, her beauty, her crimes, and her eerie calmness in the face of death. She became both a symbol of fear and fascination, the embodiment of a woman who had turned the most sacred bond, trust, into an instrument of murder. People who had once known her struggled to reconcile the gentle woman who smiled in the marketplace with the poisoner described in the courtroom. Her neighbors remembered her as polite, soft-spoken and helpful, unable to understand how that same woman had slipped arsenic into cups of beer and bowls of soup. To them, it felt as if a demon had hidden behind her delicate features, one that had watched quietly as she played her deadly games among those who least suspected her. Even in death, Anna's story refused to rest. In the years that followed, her crimes were studied by criminologists and psychologists, trying to understand what could drive a woman to such cold precision. Some believed greed was her only motive, that her addiction to gambling and luxury consumed her humanity until nothing remained but hunger for more. Others saw something deeper, a thirst for control, a need to dominate those who trusted her completely, to hold power over life and death. They described her as a narcissist with a fragile ego, masking insecurity beneath a polished smile. The more they studied her, the more unsettling she became. Unlike many killers who acted out of rage or revenge, Anna killed quietly, efficiently, and often without emotion. Her victims suffered slowly, their pain disguised as illness, while she played the role of nurse and savior. It was this duality that fascinated the public, the idea that someone could exist as both healer and destroyer, angel and executioner within the same breath. Her trial and execution marked a turning point in American history as well. The case forced society to confront the uncomfortable truth that evil did not always come in the form of violence or visible cruelty. It could hide behind manners, intelligence, and grace. The public, used to seeing women as passive or nurturing, struggled to comprehend how a woman could manipulate and kill with such calm precision. The newspapers printed her photographs again and again, each caption blending horror with intrigue. Her story became the subject of radio shows, pulp novels, and whispered retellings in darkened rooms. Parents warned their children about trusting too easily, and in the bars and gambling halls of Cincinnati, her name became a cautionary legend whispered between hands of cards. They said that whenever a woman smiled too sweetly at the table, men would joke nervously that Anna Hahn's ghost had returned to play another game. Forensic experts began to use her case as an example of how poisoners operated, studying the way she administered doses and masked symptoms. It was one of the earliest cases where chemical evidence played a decisive role in securing a conviction, shaping the future of criminal investigations. Her story appeared in textbooks and lectures, used to illustrate the psychology of manipulation and the methods of a calculated killer. Yet, beyond the academic analysis, there was always the haunting question: how could she do it? How could she look into the eyes of a dying man, a man who trusted her, and feel nothing? Some suggested that the hard years of poverty and disappointment in her early life had built a wall around her emotions, that she had learned to see people not as individuals, but as stepping stones toward survival. Others believed that she was born without empathy, destined to wear the mask of charm only to conceal the emptiness within. The fear she left behind stretched far beyond Cincinnati. Letters poured into the newspapers from readers across the country, each expressing shock, disbelief, and fascination. Some condemned her as the embodiment of sin, while others pitied her, seeing her as a product of hardship and greed. The debate over whether she was a monster or a victim of her own circumstances kept her memory alive. There were even those who defended her, suggesting she was framed or misunderstood, clinging to the image of the gentle caregiver they once knew. Such divided opinions only deepened her infamy, making her more ghost than woman, more myth than murderer. The name Anna Marie Hahn became synonymous with betrayal, a reminder that trust could be fatal when placed in the wrong hands. Over the decades, her story became a mirror reflecting society's evolving views on crime, gender, and morality. She was studied alongside other infamous figures of her time, yet she remained unique in her method and motive. Her crimes were not born from sudden violence, but from patience and planning, from a deliberate choice to destroy for gain. Modern psychologists would later call her a perfect example of psychopathy hidden beneath social grace. Her ability to mimic empathy while feeling none made her one of the most chilling figures of her era. The photographs taken of her before her execution show a woman poised and serene, eyes steady, lips curved slightly upward, as if she were posing for a portrait rather than facing death. Those who saw her that morning said she looked at peace, but not in the way of someone redeemed, in the way of someone who believed she had won something no one else could see. The city of Cincinnati eventually moved on, its streets forgetting the faces of the men she killed, but her story lingered in the archives and the whispers of historians who refused to let her disappear completely. Old newspaper clippings yellowed with time, yet her image, young, blonde, and deceptively gentle, still carried a chill that transcended decades. For every generation that rediscovered her tale, the same sense of disbelief returned, the same uneasy realization that evil could hide in the most ordinary places. She had left behind no descendants, no family eager to preserve her memory, but in the dark corners of libraries and the collections of true crime enthusiasts, her legacy survived. She became part of the folklore of American crime, a cautionary tale told not just to warn of greed or deception, but to remind people that monsters do not always reveal themselves with claws or rage. Sometimes they appear with compassion, offering help with a smile and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her name lived on not just as a murderer, but as a mystery, a question that could never be fully answered about how far the human soul could fall once love, guilt, and mercy were stripped away, leaving only the hunger for power and the cold satisfaction of control.